Hello, class and Professor Timothy White. My name is Adam Rohr, and I am a junior here at Carolina University. And I wrote my paper about the understanding the leadership skills necessary for the operation of a biblical church. So I kind of went in a different view of understanding the leadership skills slash principles needed in order to lead a biblical church, because I think it's essential to know what principles you have to have in your life in order to run a biblical church as well. And we have many examples of great leaders with great potential, with not the understanding what is needed in a church. They seem like they're persuaded by the world and self-glorification, and it always ends poorly. So I think it's important for us to go over some things that we need to implement in our lives, because so we can be a leader in a biblical church. Matthew 20:25-28 says, "But Jesus called them to him and said, 'You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to serve, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom to many.'" This is the kind of leadership that we are going for. In these verses, it's going to show you that Jesus is a servant. And I think, and what we're going to go over in this video and in this paper is we're going to go over 7 specific skills or principles that have to do with leadership. The first one's love, modesty, self-development, motivation, correction, integrity, and following God's will. So the first one, love. The first skill or principle is love. I know for me, I grew up in a church where I knew my pastor loved me. I knew he loved everyone in that congregation. 1 John 4:8 says, "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." And I know, being a Christian, you should be Christ-like. And in that verse is saying that God is love. So I think it's important for us to make it our mission to love others, because Romans 5:5 says, "And hope does not put us to shame, because God has poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who has given it to us." And I think that's so important, and that's something the Holy Spirit can help you with, loving people. John 13:35 says, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So that's how people are going to know that we're different. Love is absolutely essential for any leader or for any Christian in that matter, because their hearts should reflect God's heart. So making people feel loved and loving people should be a skill that you have, should be a principle that you have, and you should have that to show your congregation it is needed to operate a biblical church. The second skill I would say is modesty, or either modesty slash humility. And we all know, anyone watching this video, we know that pride is a very vicious cycle. And that can lead to many problems in the church, even shutting down a church because of pride issue. In my paper, I talked about a guy named Mark Driscoll, who was a pastor of the first mega church, Mars Hill. And we saw how pride entered his life, and he was so self-glorifying that his church eventually split. Proverbs 16:5 says, "And everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be ensured he will not go unpunished." So, yeah, pride is a very bad thing. Actually, in Proverbs 16:18-19 says, "Pride goes before destruction, haughty spirit before a fall. It is better to be a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud." I think everyone would agree that every leader needs the skill of modesty and humility, and I personally think that's one of the most important ones. Off to the next one is, I think every leader needs self-development, and I think that's a really important one too. And for me, one of the coolest things that I see in the Bible is that Jesus even had self-development. I mean, we're not going to see a lot of time, we are going to see, sorry. We're going to see a lot of the times when these crowds were following Jesus, he actually slipped away so he could spend time with God. And we don't read a lot of things about Jesus's life as a kid, but we know that Jesus was not just born with all the things that we know of him to be as today. Jesus had to learn how to walk. He had to learn how to talk and laugh just like everyone else. He learned to do all the basics of reading, working, and people skills. In Luke 2:52, it says Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. So Jesus himself had to grow in wisdom. He had self-development because it is essential to grow in your faith. So I think if we're seeing Jesus have self-development, I think it's important for us to show self-development. And one time I asked my pastor when I started working at the church, I asked my pastor, what's the hardest part of ministry? And his answer was this. His answer was your own personal walk with God. And I feel like a lot of the times leaders will get like me and they'll go and they'll forget what they're going for. And I strongly believe that self-development should be a priority and should be a skill that every leader has. The fourth skill or principle is motivation or encourager. Nehemiah 2:17 says, "Then I said to them, you see that trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision." Sorry. In this passage, you're going to see that Nehemiah had motivation skills. You're going to see that they were in troubled times, but that never stopped him from being motivated and to motivate people to get the wall finished. Another great example was Jesus himself. I'm sure along the path that people got discouraged. I mean, they were suffering. They were going through things that no one had been going through, and Jesus probably had to be right there motivating them. And I think it is a vital skill and principle for motivation and encouragement as a leader that is operating a biblical church, because we see leaders in the Bible that it helps so much. The next one is a pretty big one that could go wrong very quickly if you don't do it in the right way, and that is correction. I would say that my pastor's biggest gift is the skill of correction. Correcting other people is very important, and it is important to do it in the right way. Hebrews 10:24-25 says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." There are going to be some verses like 1 Thessalonians 5:13-14, 2 Timothy 23-26, and they're all basically saying that this is important. Correction is very important, done in the right way. And I think that is why every leadership must lead that shows correction in the most godly way possible. Always leading them to the Bible, always telling them biblical advice and whatnot. The next skill is integrity, and this is a big one. One of my favorite pastors to listen to, Craig Groeschel of Life Church, he did a very good message about integrity, and his big topic was, how much is your integrity worth? One of his quotes says, "If we live with integrity, nothing else matters, but if we don't live with integrity, nothing else matters." Proverbs 16:13 says, "Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him who speaks what is right." This is so important because in order to be a leader, you have to have a following. And the thing that people will not follow is a leader that lacks integrity. Therefore, in order to operate a biblical church, you must have a following. In order to have a following, you must have integrity. So I think integrity is absolutely essential and needed in order to operate a biblical church. And this is the last one that I want to go over. The last one is probably the most important one. The follower of God's will. And that is a principle that you have to have in your life, even as just a Christian. But I think it's very important as well for a leader to operate a biblical church. Always to be seeking God's direction. A good leader that can operate a biblical church is going to seek the Lord in everything that he does. It is the act of committing their life to Him and acknowledging that His plans and ways are way better than you can ever come up with. We always have to die to ourselves, pick up the cross, and follow Jesus in everything that we do. Proverbs 16, 1 through 9 is going to talk about that, following Jesus and the heart of a man's plan his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. In that leadership, the Lord has to establish your steps. A lot of this principle involves the other ones that have already been listed, like loving, being modest, having self-development, being a motivator, encourager, using correction, having integrity. They all follow under God's will, following God's will. We need to use our brains and the strength that God has given us in order for God to direct our steps, allowing Him to direct our steps. And I know that's hard sometimes because a heart of a man is evil. But when we let God into our hearts, we have the Holy Spirit to help us, and that's such an encouragement. So yeah, those are the principles and skills that I wrote about in my paper. This was a very, very fun paper, and I love doing it, and I learned so much by doing it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.